Hi, everybody. It's another day, another lecture. So, today, what we're going to be talking about is students with physical disabilities, health impairments, and multiple disabilities. If you have questions, as always, with these lectures that are recorded, make sure that you send me an email or a text and ask for more information, additional resources, or other types of things. Today's learning objectives are really to talk about identifying the characteristics of these students, talk about the causes, describe somewhat how we design educational programs around students' needs, and articulate effective instructional practices for students in this category. When you look at the prevalence of these types of disabilities, these are considered low incidence disabilities. They make up a very small portion of these types of things for students. And one of the things that's sort of interesting to think about is that it really came into being to have some sense of understanding as a result of World War I veterans, because people were coming back from the war with many kinds of orthopedic impairments, traumatic brain injuries, and complications that really did require additional funding for vocational rehabilitation. And so the awareness for these types of individuals started to become prominent at the beginning of the last century. I think one of the things that you really want to talk about in terms of the 21st century is really that there have been such substantial progress that has been made for individuals with physical disabilities, and that's because of universal access. Again, think about how we navigate through the world, those curb cuts, those braille on elevator buttons, the ability to increase someone's access to their physical surroundings. Medical interventions as well as technology are extraordinary. And universal design for learning really speaks to accessibility for these individuals with disabilities through modifications. As we start off in all of our talks about this, you need to look at the legal definitions. The categories that we are speaking to much specifically during this class are orthopedic impairments, traumatic brain injury, blind deafness, which is considered, again, it's a multiple disability, and it requires some very special services be provided for communication, severe developmental delays, and other types of educational needs for these individuals. Multiple disabilities are concurrent impairments. In other words, it's the intellectual or developmental disability that coexists with blindness or with orthopedic impairment, which can result in very severe educational needs. Other health impairment really comes under the criteria of a multitude of medical issues, a multitude of things that require students to possibly have special education services as a result of things like Crohn's disease or epilepsy or attention deficit. And again, it does not mean that because you have these, you automatically become eligible for these services, but it is very much a possibility, and that service requirement is done as a result of assessment. Under these types of umbrella kinds of things, we have the less common physical disabilities. And again, our friend from Including Samuel is included in this. He had neuromotor impairment of cerebral palsy. So did Keith Jones. And again, you have to remember that depending on the severity of the disease or the severity of the motor impairment, that these individuals may or may not require special education services. There are types of seizure disorders that can occur that could be from birth and or not. And traumatic brain injury, which a severe head trauma is the most common. Again, less common physical disabilities would be something in the realm of degenerative diseases, such as muscular dystrophy. Children may have this inherited progressive disease that affects their movement and function. It also might take them away from education because of hospitalization. Orthopedic and musculoskeletal disorders, including juvenile diabetes or spinal curvatures. Again, these are all sort of dependent on the severity of the condition. So today, really what we're going to do is focus on things that are more likely to be happening in our world of education. I'm not going to read down this whole list, so take a little bit of time, stop the video, and see where this process of all of these different lists of things are occurring under this sort of umbrella. What's been quite problematic is the fact that we have in this country about 23 million Americans, 7 million of them who are under 18, who are affected by asthma. And that's a CDC statistic. It's considered the leading cause of hospitalization in children. And so you can see where if a child is taken out of school on an often basis because their lungs are compromised as a result of asthma, it could create some serious implications in terms of their educational process. When we look at congenital types of diseases, AIDS and HIV, which is an acquired immune deficiency, it tends to break down the body's immune system. We look at the importance of screening now in pregnant women in order to ensure that there's early detection and treatment before kids are even born. The number of cases as a result of that, the number of babies being born since 1991 has actually dropped significantly. And currently, right now, you're looking at maybe only 100 children who are born with this. And that has to do with health and screening. Multiple disabilities, again, as I said earlier, are something that involves a child who will require some extensive ongoing support in more than one of life's major activities. So think about dressing, navigating the world physically, um, feeding themselves, etc. This sort of gives you a sense of the distribution of educational settings for kids, for example, who are deaf-blind. When you look at separate school settings, it still is within at least a third of children are housed in either residential schools or different types of schools that are created to be separate from the general education environment based on their needs. Some of the emerging research that addresses genetics, things like gene therapy and germline therapy, really have had some impact in terms of the genetic factors that often happen and result in a child who has multiple physical disabilities. There are some ethical considerations and implications about bioengineering in the 21st century. In other words, the use of genes to alter the natural course of human development. And so with gene replacement, the defective gene could be replaced and corrected. But think about the fact that there's an issue of bioethics that we still don't know the outcomes will be in the 21st century. What I'd like you to do right now is to take the time to stop this video and go to Blackboard. Masoon Syed is a woman of amazingly funny banter in this TED Talk that is entitled, "Got 99 Problems, Palsy is Just One of Them." So right now, take the time to stop and look at this video, because I think it will give you a reality check about how we who are differently abled sometimes view those who are different from us. All right, so take a break, stop the video, take a stretch, do what you need to do, and then come back. The next section that I'm going to go over very briefly is about evaluating students. Again, initial evaluations for this category of students or individuals is really done from the medical model. Pediatricians, neurologists, orthopedists usually are part of the initial screening, and that's part of the creation of a comprehensive medical history from the parents, from dealing with pregnancy and labor and where the developmental process of these children go forward with. So that type of assessment then would lead to when a child reaches an age of going to school, a comprehensive educational assessment is then done by individuals who are looking to provide services for these kids, students, in order to meet their needs. These are needs-based assessments, and they need to be really complete. They need to be really timely, and they need to be multidisciplinary for very obvious reasons. really what you're looking at is different types of things when we come into school, right? It has to do with how we have individuals participate. What kind of tasks do they need support with? How can we provide assistive technology in order to give them that access? And there's a whole continuum of service that is out there that we can provide, from services in the general education program to special services in which children are pulled out or in a setting most of the day, to residential schools. And again, it's the whole RTI approach. In other words, what kind of adaptations and use of universal design for learning to ensure accessibility. Tier 2 is more specialized in individual support from specialists. And the third one is the most restrictive environment, which would be considered special programs or residential programs. So when we talk about partnering, right, collaboration is very important in all of our creation of services for all of our students, whether they're typically developing children or atypically developing children. But it takes a multidisciplinary approach, because you have to look primarily at the health condition that could really impact that educational performance for an individual education plan or IEP. We talk about the components of a healthcare plan under the guise of what's called MAPS. In other words, what's your health history? What dreams do you have going forward? What are your nightmares going forward? Who are you? What are your strengths and gifts and talents? What do you need? And what's the action plan that needs to be created for you to get there? And as functioning, wonderfully fabulous adults, we all have this map in mind as we go forward in through adulthood. So the types of things, when you talk about determination of services, it could be peer tutoring, because again, like all of us, we really need to have some sort of socialization, because human beings are social animals. Assistive technology is an amazing tool, and there are lots of different devices, a lot of different things that we can now afford to provide our students to be able to communicate, whether that's through speech communication, where there's a board or an electronic device that affords them speech, or some sort of writing tool and systems that allow them to be able to display what they know. When we talk about something called alternative augmentative communication, it's really sort of a non-traditional way of communication. In other words, it has symbols, displays, selection of options, or maybe output modes that are available. Sorry about that. When we talk about planning for universal design in our lessons, it's interesting because now pretty much in terms of what we do as typical students or typical people is to have some sort of an electronic text, right? That's kind of becoming the norm now. So it provides, we provide an opportunity for students like this to have some sort of word processing device, have embedded links that they can simply click on, download some sort of a digital talking book player. It affords them ways of accessing the curriculum in ways that even 15 years ago wasn't even imagined. There are also handheld technologies in which there are prompters. In other words, a visual assistant handheld portable prompter that allows students to complete multiple tasks. It's kind of like our checklist, right? When you get into an airplane as a pilot, and you sit down at the controls, there's a checklist that you go through in order to successfully take off. And that's what this is. It's a virtual assistant checklist. There are other kinds of learning needs that need to be addressed, and one of them may be providing adaptive PE. During my tenure as a K-4 teacher, I worked very closely with the adaptive PE provider, and we actually got all of the kids in the class, not just the ones who had some unique needs about them, involved. If you think about this type of program, including Samuel, if you remember, there was a scene in which Samuel and his peers were doing things like the T-ball that's set up for him. They were also doing an egg race where I think that they had taped a spoon to his hand to help him out. Things in which everybody can participate, but that allowed him to be able to participate within his setting, within his peers. Again, it's how do you make sure that there are precautions made for everyone to be able to be safe. It's also about implementing strategies for inclusion, because when you design a curriculum in which there's a certain amount of self-determination of choice or autonomy to be able to do it by yourself, it really provides a unique way to allow a child's also self-esteem to be able to grow. You have to remember that all of these things have to be age appropriate as much as possible. And again, as with all of our children, we go back to what the culturally responsive practices are. In other words, what culture do we need to take into consideration for them also to be successful within this construct? Sometimes teachers and those around in schools need to be able to have to take into account precautions, especially when you talk about children who have compromised immune systems, or there are people in place who need to do things like help children go to the toilet, help children also eat. So things like using of gloves, proper hand washing if there are accidents involved with bodily fluids, and properly clean up procedures for what's considered biohazard. So again, all of those things need to be taken into place and put into place when we have children who have those kinds of needs within our classrooms. One of the things that I know that is really important is supporting kids with serious health needs is the fact that we have to really make sure that we have plans in place for medications, for things like EpiPens if something like that is required for a child who has severe allergies. What is the plan specifically for all the people within that child's realm during education to be able to make sure that there are things in place that we plan for if there is a medical emergency? Also, again, to think about what the specific limitations are and needs, that you need to be in a place where you have to modify something because of a child so they are not injured within, the course of PE, within the course of classrooms, that sometimes there are things in classrooms that don't seem to be dangerous or sharp, but you have to really review and look at what's going on in your classroom. You have to also, as a teacher, be able to recognize the signs of some sort of health-related difficulty. If a child is getting what appears to be fatigued, if they're flushed, and know how to support that child's health need. being prepared for medical emergencies. And again, understanding that the child's interest and strengths are something that need to be nurtured and supported as well. Oftentimes, students who are in this category, we often look at sort of an expanded core curriculum, and we look at things like life skills across the grade levels. What are some of the things that we need to sort of start preparing a child for in terms of going out in the world to be able to take care of themselves, to be able to navigate the community, to have fun and have leisure like all of us do, and maybe prepare them for some sort of a vocational task. So if you need to look at this, these slides are also posted in a way in that you do not need to listen to me while you review some of the categories that I skim over. When we look at early childhood with kids, you try and set up things like errorless learning for frustration. You want kids to become active and self-motivated learners. They learn best when they have an opportunity to practice the skills that contain some sort of meaningful activity. In other words, it's not just mindless. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. Keith talked about that in Including Samuel, that he felt that he was placed initially in a classroom where he didn't want to color. He wanted something meaningful as math. So again, you have to really look at where these kids are, what their needs are, what their intellectual capabilities are, what their developmental capabilities are, and provide choice in learning environments so that they can shine. Kids learn best through a curriculum that's presenting information in an integrated fashion. And that's also very much the same with these children. When you get to elementary and middle school, we talk about a lot of self-advocacy skills that need to be taught and have them be participants in their own learning. What kind of supports are there for them that have nothing to do with instruction? What kinds of ways do they wish to participate? In other words, we're not just telling them what to do and how to do it, we're asking them how to do it. And we have to make sure that teachers enhance students' independence as opposed to enhancing what's called learned helplessness. Like all of us, right? The driver's license is the key to freedom and independence. And having that driver's license impacts a student's social activities. We need to really think about how we afford them, because there are people out there who can have access to modified vehicles and be successful independent drivers. So this slide is actually 10 things to think about when you talk about transition into adulthood. And again, I'm going to leave this for you to go back to and review. It has to do with self-advocacy and how we want our students to really go into adulthood. This particular slide, although it's blurry, is possible issues that parents encounter. And again, I think even if we looked at just the segment in the video in Including Samuel, you'll somewhat have an understanding of what the parents need to look at, because at every stage in life, we all have all sorts of very interesting challenges. But with these students, when you look at it, we have to look at what the types of things in terms of what parents need to do. When they're early, they have to figure out how to locate services for their child. As kids get older and go into adolescence, how do parents work with their children to be able to help them understand the emotional component of, going forward with with something of an exceptionality when they go forward. In adulthood, what happens if a child needs to have a guardianship? And again, these are issues that parents face across the lifetime of that student. Measuring kids' progress in any atmosphere is something that's really important, because what is it about? It's about knowing that what you're teaching is being learned. So more often than not, measuring students' progress is based on curriculum. It could be based on some sort of a portfolio that's created. Measurement at APE, that's adaptive PE, and observation. So it's actually not any different than what we work with typical kids. You're just looking at possibly different modicums of success, and what kind of accommodations for assessment are being provided. And so it's really important that we speak to the types of things that we all need, but these kids need a lot more of. I know it's the tip of the iceberg, but saying that this is a specialty in the educational system that's very different from a education specialist who works with mild to moderate students with mild to moderate disabilities. Kids with extensive disabilities add another layer of teaching, partly because of the curriculum is also reinforces life types of skills. Again, if you have any questions on this particular topic or anything else, make sure that you send me an email or send me a text with your name. There will be a study guide up for the final, and make sure you check on Blackboard. Going forward, we're close to the end of the semester, so clarity of information is really important. I will see you soon. Enjoy your week. And I'm going to stop share right now, say goodbye, and talk to you again soon.